Hello, this is Scribble coming to you from the second round of Grand Prix Delhi for MSEM. So today I am playing against GoblinWarBuggy, who is playing Monoblue Merfolk deck. This deck has been performing pretty well in the last couple of Grand Prix, but it did receive a nerf recently to Erlanton Pearl Reader to be a bit less powerful by needing you to control 2 Merfolk instead of 1 in order to get the card draw when it enters the battlefield. So I am on white and blue activated ability control. I believe I have a solid matchup here because I play quite low to the ground, and answering their lords with 1-to-1 removal spells seems like a pretty decent strategy as long as those are on the cheap end, which mine are. Though they could definitely end up playing a bit too fast for me to answer. So I've got a pretty good hand, 2 lands, an engine that I can't cast at the moment, but I'm likely to draw into another land. I've got 3 pieces of interaction, so this seems pretty nice. My opponent starts out with a Bone Tooth Data, which is going to tax my counter spells. Okay, we've got into our 3rd land now, so that's nice. We'll have all of our colors of mana. I think because of the Bone Tooth Data, Cosmic Sinkhole is not going to be a live play during my opponent's next turn, because if they have something of value, the Bone Tooth Data can just kill it. So counter the Sinkhole, so I think that means I'm supposed to start out with the Terraformer's Globe here. Though actually, it might be worthwhile just getting the Bone Tooth Data off the board by forcing them to sacrifice it with the Sinkhole, and then I can counter whatever they play the turn after that. Terraformer's Globe is likely to draw me into some removal though, or just getting the cantrip means I am going to get removal a bit faster, so I think I am just going to go for that. Can't complain about a 4th land in a control deck. So turn 2 is a big turn for the Merfolk deck. Any number of lords could come down here. Not a lord, but a Refraction Diver, which pairing with the lords puts on quite a bit of pressure. Okay, another Spiritual Guidance is not really what I'm looking for here. Okay, so my opponent's deck doesn't have many creatures above 2 mana, so it's possible that this Cosmic Sinkhole is not going to be incredible now that we're going into turn 3. That could definitely mean that it was better to go with my other plan of using it last turn instead of the Terraformer's Globe. Okay, no Lord pre-combat. That is pretty nice. Not taking too much damage this turn. Opponent not going for anything. In terms of spells, they can cast Instant Speed. They have a Spell Pierce. They have Emissary of Dark Tides, which they can use to bounce something on my turn. Agent of Deception is not going to really hit anything in my deck. I don't have very many targets for the counter. So they do have a bunch of things that they can cast on my turn. There's nothing that I can cast at the moment, so I'm good to just pass. This would be a nice time to slam my Spiritual Guidance and then get a free draw off of Terraformer's Globe. But if my opponent is holding a Spell Pierce or an Emissary of Dark Tides, that becomes a pretty dangerous play, because then my opponent could follow that up with a Lord and I would be in some trouble. So I think I'm supposed to pass here and just continue to hold up my counter magic. Okay, opponent is flashing in just a 1/1 for 1. I think I'm fine with this. Yeah, I don't get anything from countering this one, so this is fine. I'd rather hit their lords. The fact that they were holding that up makes me think that they might have a Spell Pierce, just because that's how their mana would have worked out this turn. Being able to hold up both of those things to cast on the same turn is a pretty decent reason to not play a proactive threat during their turn. Okay, opponent has cast a Rushwater Raider. I think I might supposed to be countering that with Cosmic Sinkhole, especially because I have no onboard ways of handling their creatures just yet. Okay, opponent opting not to sacrifice the Bone Tooth Data to save their creature. That makes me think that they have another flash threat. Okay, so we're going into turn 4 now, which means that Portal Fracture can hard counter spells with mana value 2 or less, which is pretty much my opponent's deck. That could be a reason to, again, not deploy Spiritual Guidance, because if my opponent plays a Lord that I can't counter in their next turn, then they'll be doing 2, 4, 6, 8 damage to me, which is a lot. So I think my plan is to play Spiritual Guidance on turn 5, when I can also hold up a potential Portal Fracture. And since I don't have any proactive spells in my hand that I can cast on my opponent's turn, I'm going to drop Monument of Queens just in case my opponent doesn't do anything and I have something to spend all my mana on. Okay, opponent still no Lord post pre-combat. They are choosing to play almost entirely instant speed, which makes it a bit more difficult for my deck to answer, but it also means they're not threatening me as much with their Lords. Okay, so they do have a Pearl Reader. They're going for this post-combat. So if I pull Fracture this one, my opponent could sacrifice their Bone Tooth data to put me to 1 mana, and then they could Spell Pierce a counterspell, but I have a Cosmic Sinkhole for that. So this lines up pretty well, so I am going to attempt to counter this. Okay, maybe my opponent doesn't have a Cosmic Sinkhole at the moment. Okay, drawn into a Wayfarer's Shrine, which is nice because this way I have 2 ways of triggering Spiritual Guidance on my and my opponent's next turn. And since all that I'm holding up otherwise is Cosmic Sinkhole, I'm just going to deploy it now. My opponent could definitely blow me out here, but there's nothing else I can really do. Okay, and I'm just going to go for it now. My opponent doesn't have anything other than a Spell Pierce that they could be holding up at this point. Okay, we've drawn an Order Module, so this can help me by putting a bunch of 1/1s into play, and also interacting with my opponent's board. But there's nothing I can do at the moment, so I'm just going to pass, and hope that this Cosmic Sinkhole can snag something. Okay, so that is a Lord, putting them to 8 damage on board. Spiritual Guidance will put me to 9, but Wayfarer's Shrine costs a life to activate. So Cosmic Sinkhole is not going to help me here, which means I think I need to go for the Wayfarer's Shrine now and try to cantrip into an answer with Spiritual Guidance. I think that seems to be my only out at this point. Okay, that doesn't get me there. So my opponent has lethal on board, but I will let them keep playing, and I will make them commit to the attack, just in case my open mana is a bit spooky and they don't go for it, on the very small chance. Nah, that's it, opponent go for it. So tight game, not drawing any onboard interaction is a bit rough, but that's what happens with this deck sometimes. Okay, so looking at some sideboarding answers. My opponent only has Spell Pierce as a non-creature spell. They're not going to bring in Soul Pierce. Misquantify hits about half my deck, so that is something that they could bring in. Their lands don't particularly matter against me. Emissary of Dark Tides I could see them bringing in, but I think their main board is solid enough where they don't want to make too many changes. Though I could see them removing Agent of Deception due to me not having any creatures and me having a few Planeswalkers. So with all of that, my counterspells are not particularly good in this matchup because they only hit no non-creatures. Harm's Way is definitely a good one. Out of a Body Experience, probably also another one. Opponent goes quite wide, so Setting Sun will be good here. My deck isn't particularly awful against them. There's not a ton that I need to get rid of. Order Module is a pretty inefficient answer, but it does let me deploy some blockers, which is nice. I think Hemley Eggfeather is probably a bad pick in this matchup. My opponent goes more wide than they have good single target removal threats, and I would like to stay instant speed if I can. I think I might want to go down a Setting Sun, because my opponent does have some taxing counterspells, so running additional 4-drops is not fantastic. And I think I'm leaning towards cutting a Spiritual Guidance, so I have more action, more answers. Actually, I think I will just cut a second Setting Sun and just have one of those. We'll swap it out for an Ajani. A Setting Sun does seem better here. Okay, we have a hand of 5 lands, 2 2-mana answers, which would be a bit sketchy on the draw, but on the play, this is a lot better, so I will keep this and just hope to draw into something better. So, no turn 1 interaction, and life is important in this matchup, so holding up the fetch at the cost of life to try and bluff a counterspell isn't where I want to be here. Okay, my opponent has sighted in the Mirror Gates, or at least one of them. They're looking to turn off Heart of Zadina. That's fine, I'm okay with that. I don't rely too much on that, it's just a bit of a freebie for extra mana in my deck. Because my opponent is on mono color, they don't gain anything from me naming a second color to Mirror Gate, so I am going to choose to name an extra color. This is also nice because it means they're not playing something on turn 1. Okay, because I have a pool of light in my hand, I'm just going to go and fetch a basic so that enters untapped. Okay, we've drawn a Midnight Jury, so one of our engines. That would be real nice, especially with a fetch in the hand, and then eventually a Monument of Queens to be able to trigger that later. Helps me get on board with some blockers. I don't believe my opponent has any ways of bouncing or otherwise interrupting that once it's on board. Nope, okay, so this is a really nice turn to be able to deploy this without any counterspells. Okay, opponent's got a Refraction Diver. Thankfully, I'll be able to answer this with Event Horizon if my opponent deploys anything else. I could also trigger a fetch land to make a token and then answer the Refraction Diver that way. But I think holding up Portal Fracture is more important here. Event Horizon is something that I can do later on if I need to. Okay, I think I will play the Ocean Monastery untapped here at the cost of life, just so I can get a token, start blocking some things. My opponent's slow start means I'm not at as much risk of being burnt out as I would normally be. Okay, opponent's going for a Lord. They could be holding up a Spell Pierce backup, but if they have a Spell Pierce, then Event Horizon can catch it later. So I am just going to go for the Portal Fracture here. Yep, opponent has a Spell Pierce. Okay, taking a bit of a hit here, but I think I can recover from this. We're starting to add to a board now. I believe this will just be fetching a Plains. Okay, Spiritual Guidance is nice, but I don't have any ways of triggering it at the moment. So I think this is a hold-up interaction turn. So, interestingly, Refraction Diver has Slipstream, but Lord of the Bubble Dome does not. So if my opponent goes for an attack with both of these, then I can use my Spirit to block the Refraction Diver, and then attempt to kill the Lord of the Bubble Dome before damage is dealt to trade off with the Diver. So I will deploy the Monument of Queens again here, potentially as a bluff, but I am planning to use my interaction this turn. Okay, opponent is going for the attack. They have a bunch of things that they can use to interact with my plan here, but I do think it's the best thing that I've got going on. Okay, this is fantastic. I can counter that, and my opponent cannot respond to it because they're tapped out. So this clears up their board really nicely. And then being tapped out means I get a turn of being able to deploy Spiritual Guidance. Okay, Shikai's Readout is a way of triggering my enchantment engines. It's not the best way, but I will take it. And I think I'm going to use that on my turn now in case I draw into another way of triggering the enchantments on my opponent's turn. Okay, my opponent doesn't have any ways of recurring things, so it doesn't matter what I target here. Okay, we have a Cosmic Sinkhole, which is not super likely to do anything this turn, but that's okay. I don't need additional white mana, but the blue mana might be nice. Though, actually, no, I didn't bring any double blue spells in, I only have double white spells, so at this point I think I name white, and I'll go with black. Don't need to name red, because if I draw Heart of Zedina, that will be producing red. Okay, Refraction Diver, I can't answer that, that's okay. Okay, out-of-body experience is very nice. So I think what's going to happen here this turn is I will out-of-body experience something on my opponent's turn, and then follow that up either with a Monument of Queens or a Spiritual Guidance activation, depending on what my opponent plays. Okay, opponent going for another Mirror Gate. Probably going to name Monument of Queens, but I don't get anything from using something in response to the ETB. So I'll let them go ahead and do that. Yep, that's fine, that's as expected. So I'm going to pick green as my color, which gives me access to 5 colors once I draw the Heart of Zedina if I need it. Okay, I think I'm going to use the out-of-body experience on the Refraction Diver. Since with this much mana, I don't think my opponent would choose to wait until post-combat to be able to play a Lord. I think they would want to do this pre-combat, so I think their hand might not be the best at the moment. There is always the risk of them flashing in a Kilia's Scavenger here if I decide to tap out for Spiritual Guidance. But at this point, unless I'm planning to keep mana up at all times for Cosmic Sinkhole and just never activate any abilities, not activating the guidance here seems like a bad play. Yep, there we go. Okay, opponent finds an Orlanton Pill Reader, but thankfully they don't get the card draw of that because we've hit their other Merfolk this turn. Okay, so my opponent's drawn when they shouldn't have, so we'll just need to do a quick fix here. Okay, so because my opponents chose to scry a card to the top and then drew, let's just judge call this one just to be safe. Okay, not sure if there are any judges around, so we might just continue. Okay, so we're going to continue here. So remembering to get my triggers off of my enchantments. Okay, so drawing into 2 lands is not what I needed here. So I think I am going to need to probably use my Spiritual Guidance this turn to tap down one of my opponent's creatures. A Spirit can block the Elemental if it decides to attack. I don't think I'm in too much risk at the moment, so I don't need to chump block, and I can afford to take my time while I build up a bigger board with Midnight Jury. Since that'll cost me 4 mana, I will have 1 mana left over to be able to Cosmic Sinkhole, and having 2 mana open for that doesn't help me, so this seems like the right time to deploy Mirror Gate. And I will name Cresting Bay as the only land that really matters in this matchup. My opponent will be picking blue here, and since I have access to all of the colors, I'm going to name red. Okay, opponent has a Lord. I've only got access to blue, white, green, and black, so I can only tax that for 4, so I will need to let that go. Before attacks, I will use the Spiritual Guidance. Just need to hold up a blue. Okay, Event Horizon is very nice. Yep, opponent going to make the Killia Scavenger unblockable, so I can't chump block it, but that's fine. I wasn't planning to do that anyway. This does tell me that they might not have anything all that good to spend their mana on, or that it's something cheap. So I could imagine a Spell Pierce. But I am getting to the point where I have a lot of mana, so a Spell Pierce is not super relevant. Okay, we've got a Midnight Jury here, and I have 7 mana. So if I choose to play that, and my opponent does have a Spell Pierce, then I can't activate Spiritual Guidance and resolve a Cosmic Sinkhole in the same turn, but that's fine, I think. I don't have any other way of being able to trigger activate abilities twice in the turn cycle. So if I tap down one of my opponent's creatures next turn, I will be taking 8 damage if I choose not to chump block. So this is a point where I would need to be chump blocking, I believe. I could also choose not to play the Midnight Jury this turn and hold up the extra mana for Event Horizon. And I think that benefits me more at this point than getting an extra spirit on my opponent's turn. Okay, so if I go for the Spiritual Guidance activation first and then Event Horizon, my opponent will be able to get me with a Spell Pierce, so I believe I need to Event Horizon first here. It's just Lord of the Bubblebone that gives extra utility here, so my pick to exile would be that. My opponent might give things Slipstream in response. Yep, which seems like what they're doing. Okay, so that's ended up okay. I am putting my opponent on some reactive spell at the moment. I think it very well might be Spell Pierce. Okay, drawing into all these lands and Cosmic Sinkholes, well, isn't fantastic. It does give me the extra mana to play around Spell Pierce while using my activated abilities, so I think this is going okay for me at the moment. I could spend my 8 mana using Spiritual Guidance on my turn and my opponent's turn, which I think might be worthwhile at this point. Although I could also just use it twice on my opponent's turn if I need to. And since my opponent doesn't have a way of granting Slipstream to their attackers at the moment. I think it's unlikely that they go for an attack at all if I'm tapping down one of their creatures. Oh, opponent has conceded there. It seems like they were flooding out a bit and didn't draw enough gas. So my playing to the board seemed to work out in favor against them this turn. So now that I'm on the draw, my counter to spells gets slightly worse, particularly the Portal Fractures, but those aren't things that I really want to cut. It's possible that I want to remove the Ajani Enlightened for another Setting Sun. Because if I do land a single Setting Sun, my opponent doesn't have too many ways of rebuilding outside of Achilles Scavenger. And any spell that can counter Setting Sun would also counter Ajani Enlightened, so I think that's a change that I'm going to make here. Does mean that I have fewer ways of triggering my enchantments though. This leaves me with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and fetch lands. I think that seems okay. I think I'm happy to go with that. Okay, so we've got 3 cheap interactive spells. We have an engine. We have a way of providing an activated ability every turn, even though it's a bit expensive. So I'm willing to keep this one. Okay, the turn 1 Bone Tooth Data. Slightly scary, but we can get around that. That can't hit the Intrepid that we just drew, and it can't hit the Spiritual Guidance, which is nice. It'll just hit my interactive spells. Playing the Pool of Light here is my only white source, so that I can out-of-body experience next turn. Okay, there is a Cresting Bay, so my opponent will have some gas once they run out of cards. Okay, because of the Bone Tooth Data, I want to have an extra mana up this turn, so I don't want to be playing the Elratha tapped if I plan to use out-of-body experience. I think there's a good chance that I do use that on Refraction Diver. So here I'll play the Lotus Barons just to save the cheap Wayfarer's Shrine trigger for later. Okay, before attacks, since they aren't playing a Lord pre-combat, I will just be going for the out-of-body experience on the Refraction Diver. Okay, Lantern Pearl Reader, and thankfully, again, there's no draw here. They bottomed a card, kept something. Okay, so I think going for the Wayfarer's, the Spiritual Guidance this turn is likely a mistake. If my opponent does have a Spell Pierce, then they can probably put a lot of damage into play next turn. I think keeping up my interaction to be able to answer their board until they run out of threats a bit more, and I have more mana where I can start double spelling, seems ideal. This might be a good turn to get out my, get the tap land out of the way, if I plan just to use the out-of-body experience. So if my opponent does have a Achilles Scavenger next turn, I would want to hold up both out-of-body experience and Cosmic Sinkhole, so for that reason, I think I will play the Wayfarer's Shrine, just so I have access to 2 colors of mana. Okay, so using out-of-body experience here would save me 3 life, and I think I'm good with that. Okay, opponent not going anything, keeping the 4 mana up. I do think that is Achilles Scavenger coming, so I don't want to use Wayfarer's Shrine now, because that would leave me without a way of answering it if they cast it in response. And I'm okay with drawing an extra land here, so I don't feel the need to dig for things on my upkeep. Okay, so we've drawn a Portal Fracture, we have a bit more interaction. My opponent can't cast Achilles Scavenger on their end step because of Cosmic Sinkhole. So I feel fairly safe at the moment. I'm okay with playing the Elratha tapped, so my opponent doesn't get to investigate, and I'll continue just to react to what they're doing. Okay, there is that Achilles Scavenger, so in response, I will search up the island, just so I don't get color locked later if I try to respond to something by cracking it. I would like to get Intrepid down soon, so I can start blocking these 1/1 flyers that I've given my opponent. Okay, I don't benefit from casting Event Horizon here. My opponent will always just sacrifice data at a later point. Intrepid will be a nice blocker here, I think, for me to play. Also gets me a land. There's nothing else that I can really do at this point, so we will just untap here. Okay, Terraformer's Globe is a nice free way of triggering Spiritual Guidance, though that would mean that I'm fully tapping out, and I'm not guaranteed to draw into a land with the 2 draws that I would get off of Globe and Guidance. So I think here I am just going for the Intrepid. Opponent might have a Spell Pierce, which would hurt a little bit, especially if they back that up with Achilles Scavenger, but unlikely they have both. Okay, there is the Achilles Scavenger. I'm going to have to let that go. Ooh, Emissary really hurts me here, being able to bounce my Intrepid. So while they didn't get a Lord, they were able to set me quite far back in terms of tempo. I suppose here I am hoping to draw into a land. There is a land. I don't think pretending to hold up another out-of-body experience helps me here, so we will play that tap just to save some life. Though with Cresting Bay, my opponent actually has exact lethal, so yeah, it seems like they've got me with that Emissary. That's not something that I was playing around when deciding to use the Intrepid. I should have kept my mana open, but that's what you get when you're playing a control deck against tempo. Sometimes you choose to go for it, and your opponent gets you. So just to double check. Yeah, that is exact lethal. Well played to my opponent. Able to play around my interaction really well with their Kiplia scavengers, even though one of them got countered. They had the presence of mind to keep up the other one and wait for me to tap out. Punished for my greedy plays, but yeah, good games overall. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later on in the GP.